Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. You are about to witness the 10th episode of our 12-part webinar series on countermeasure strategies for pedestrian safety. We've got a fantastic program for you today. It's going to focus on traffic calming strategies for improving pedestrian safety and everything that can be done with traffic calming. So we're very excited today to have two panelists with us, Peter Unn of the Federal Highway Administration and Pete Lagerwey with Tool Design Group. We're really excited and happy to have these guys here today. My name is Angeline. I'll be facilitating today's webinar. I'd like to ask the attendees if you can hear me. Please click the hand icon located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen just to let me know that you can hear me and that my voice is coming through okay. I'll check the now to see and make sure the hands are going up. Looks like they are. All right, fantastic. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining us today. Really excited about the program we have. I think you'll enjoy it as well. If you've attended our previous webinars, the format today might be a little different than what you're used to, but it'll be a nice way to get this really important material across. I have just a few administrative details to get through before we start the presentation today. I just wanted to let everybody know, first off, if your computer freezes up, if the program freezes during the webinar, it may happen. Please just reload the website, log back in, and you should be able to rejoin the session. We've already posted the presentation slides from today's webinar on our archive page. I'll be sending out the link to that shortly via the chat pod. But that same page in about 1 to 2 weeks is also going to have a video recording from this webinar on that page. So if you would like to share it with anybody, if anybody you know wasn't able to attend today, if you want to look back at something, you'll be able to have access to all of the material, both the slides and the video recording after the fact. Note that attendees, you won't be able to speak during the webinar itself, but you will have the ability to submit questions to us, submit comments to us using the chat function. Feel free to ask questions at any time. We're planning to hold about 20 to 25 minutes at the end of the webinar for a discussion session with our panelists. Later today, you're going to be receiving an email, follow-up email from the UNC Highway Safety Research Center. It's going to include a link to allow you to download and generate and download a certificate of attendance for the webinar today. So it's very important that if you're attending this webinar with a group of people, you're going to be getting that email. Be sure to forward it around to your group so that everybody can download that certificate of attendance and access all of the information that'll be included in the email. The email is going to include not only that link to download the certificate, but also the link to the archive page where we've already posted the slides from today's webinar. That page, again, is also going to feature the video recording in about 1 to 2 weeks. So keep an eye out for that. The webinar has been submitted to and approved by the American Planning Association for 1.5 CM credits. I'd encourage you to go online, check the AICP event calendar for more information about how to claim those credits. And then to learn more about PBIC webinars or to check out past webinars, view past episodes that we've done, www.pedbikeinfo.org/webinars. One more slide here. Many of you have attended webinars in this series already. We are nearing the end of this webinar series, this 12-parter. We've only got 2 left after today. Both will be in January. You can see the topics here. So if you're interested in these topics, I'd encourage you to visit the site at the bottom of the page here to register. They're all free. You can register for these webinars. You can also go to that page to view the webinars in the series that you may have missed. So I'd encourage you to do that. The only thing left to do before we get into the presentation is to just take a quick poll from you all. We're interested in finding out how many of you are here today, how many are joining from various locations. So please take some time to cast your vote in this poll. We're mainly interested in finding out, is it just you out there attending the webinar? Do you have a couple of people in the room with you, or are you in a larger group, maybe 8 or more, in a conference room somewhere where you're all able to attend the webinar at once? So just take a few more seconds to cast your vote in this poll. Again, your feedback is very important to us. Okay, just about 5 more seconds, I'd say, on the poll, and then I'll close it up. All right, thank you all very much. I'll go ahead and close that down now. I appreciate your feedback. I'm going to go ahead and hand the screen over to Pete Lagerwey. Pete, keep an eye out for that, and let me know If you have any trouble with it, I'll let you know when I see your screen. Okay, Pete, looks good on my end, and I'll go ahead and turn things over now to Peter Unn to kick off the presentation.
Great, thanks Dan, and good morning or afternoon to everybody out there in multimodal nation. My name is Peter Unn, as Dan stated, and I'm with the Federal Highway Administration Resource Center on the Safety and Design Technical Service team, and I will be your host today for Walk and Bike This Way. Today we've got an exciting show for today with regards to traffic calming and traffic diversion. And to help us with this subject, we have a special guest who's well known around the country for his expertise in pedestrian and bicycle planning, design, and education enforcement programs. He was a former employee with the city of Seattle. So please give him an enthusiastic welcome. Our special guest, Peter Lagerway, now with Tool Design Group. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks.
So as you see here from our introductory slide, Peter and I, we moonlight as special, I guess, superheroes in the traffic world. And so we thought we'd just have some fun here. And we're going to, as Dan said, this is a little bit different as far as the format. And so we want to make sure that, you know, we're both a couple guys that like to have fun. And we hope you do too. So let's get into this whole traffic calming and diversion subject. You know, it's a hot topic these days. There's a lot of buzz around the country about livable communities and complete streets. Even Secretary of Transportation Fox has put out a challenge to mayors around the country to raise the bar for bicycle and pedestrians. And he's got an initiative called Safer People, Safer Streets. And I believe traffic calming and diversion techniques can really help meet some of the mayor's challenges initiatives. And one of them being taking a complete streets approach. And so let's get started by first defining what is traffic calming. So, you know, I guess a lot of different, there's maybe different definitions out there with regards to what traffic calming is. Peter, if can we move to the next slide? I don't know if there's a little bit of a delay. Okay, there we go. So, you know, it's a way to design streets and using self-enforcing physical measures to encourage people to drive more slowly and safely. So, Peter, maybe you can help us explain what self-enforcing and also what drive more slowly and safely, how that's defined.
Sure, and just by a little bit way of background too is I think just about every city in America is going through some thinking on, you know, how do we manage speed? How do we create great communities? How do we create place? And a lot of times the really good news is that we can manage speed and at the same time move all the traffic and really create great places to live. When you start talking about traffic calming, I think quite often we immediately jump into some of the physical measures that we introduce, like a speed hump or something like that. And we're going to talk about that, and that's very important. But I think before we go there, we want to really focus on the notion of self-enforcing. And what we mean by that is really starting just to look at more of the passive self-enforcing. And I like the image on the left of the screen here is, you know, there's no special measure, but that street messages go a little bit slower. So by having just 2 lanes in each direction, a crossing island, the planting strip, the bike lane, the pedestrians, the pedestrian lighting, it's all messaging that there's a particular speed that's appropriate here. And so I always like to think of it as, you know, there's 2 speeds on every street, the speed limit and the one people go. And the challenge, I think, and we'll be talking more about this, is how do we design our streets so that people automatically go the right speed? And you know, beyond that, certainly there are times when we need to put things in like chicanes or serpentine, the 2 images here that you see on your screen. But and those are good things to do. But I think what we really want to focus on first, so it's really a 2-step process. One is just designing streets in the first place so people automatically go the right speed. We know just changing speed limit signs doesn't always work that well. And then secondly, there definitely are opportunities in places where we want to introduce new things into the environment that will also manage the speed. So yeah, that's sort of, I guess, how I would define that sort of introductory question of what's traffic calming.
Great, thanks. And yeah, I love those images. Those are the type of streets that I would love to go down and have a pleasant drive. And so, but there's another definition out there, and I think you sort of covered it in what you presented, and that is, you said really regards to the look and feel of a roadway. And so we're not talking about law enforcement here, correct?
Right.
It's new, yeah, so self-enforcing, and it sounds like you probably read the Federal Highway Tech Brief because you covered sort of the key bullet point there. It's really about reducing speed with the look and feel. So with that, maybe we can go to the next slide and show, you know, it's 4 different images here, and we covered up the speed limit signs on this image, and I'll, you know, since we don't have the audio capability, I'll say in the top right-hand corner, or sorry, top left, let's start up there. What do you think speed limit is with the speed limit is on that roadway? What is, if you were driving down that roadway, what would I possibly be driving? I'm thinking maybe, you know, potentially 50 miles per hour. What do you think the speed limit is on there?
You know, the one thing I would just add to this too is that this gets back to the concept of the speed on a street, how it presents, should present what is an appropriate speed. And when it's designed to look one way and then the speed limit is something else, we get that disconnect. And so again, I think what we really want to talk about is how do we design the street so people automatically do the right thing.
Right. And so I think with this little, showing these pictures, we'll show that even though that the speed limit on there, maybe we can show what that is. It is, oh, sorry, my screen's so small I can't see that. Can you read what the speed limit is?
Yeah, it's 40.
Okay, so that's 40 miles per hour, and in the lower left-hand corner, we've got a very similar road, but it has, you know, the difference is we've got some the trees along the side of the edge there on both sides, and just seems to look to be visually, there's some visual friction there. So I'm going to maybe guess on that one that's probably, you know, maybe 40 miles per hour as well, potentially, because it is 4 lanes. So what would you think? Oh, that one's 35. So there's some variance.
Yeah.
Okay. How about that top right one? You know, that seems, well, that's a really wide road. I think it's in a residential. You know, I could imagine that might be more like 25, the speed limit, but definitely we can see people going probably 35 on that road. What do you say?
So I'll switch it here. And this is interesting. The speed limit here is actually 20 miles per hour, and this is a dead-end street, and this is college housing. And so again, what they would hope the speed would be, what people would do, and what it's posted at, and what it's designed at, you can see the disconnect.
Yeah. So really, it seems like there's a lot of variance with regards to how speed limits are posted, and not necessarily maybe they probably had some complaints in that neighborhood about speeding, but yet just putting up a speed limit sign wouldn't really do it, right? Which I guess gets, I like this lower right-hand image because you've got a transition area there. And I don't know if they changed, it looks like we got 2 speed limit signs there, but I'm thinking maybe one is at possibly 35, 40 miles per hour, and then down below possibly 30. What are your thoughts?
And I just pushed the button here, and they're both 35. What's interesting about this is that the speed limit coming into this edge of town is 35. Once you get into town, you really can't see very well the next speed limit sign, but it's also 35. And yet, when I stood here and watched the traffic, just about everybody's brake lights came on as they came on into this area, so people were slowing down. So it had nothing to do with changing the speed limit sign, but it had a lot to do with the change of the look and feel. So it went from a shoulder to a bike lane, from a ditch to the curb, the planting strip, and the sidewalks. No motor vehicles between the buildings and the sidewalk. In other words, parking is somewhere else, but not defining the roadway. And so all of a sudden, the look and feel is completely different, and people automatically slow down. And one of the things I guess what I would always suggest is that when you do want to look at speed and the effects of different things you introduce into the environment, is just watch the taillights. And it's a really good way to get a sense of are people automatically slowing down.
Great. And that's a great transition because, you know, we're going to talk about the trend, you know, traffic calming, and as we stated earlier, it is the changing the look and feel of a roadway rather than just putting up a speed limit sign when people complain about speeding through a neighborhood. So, you know, so we've got different traffic calming methods that we're going to talk about, and we can probably lump these into 4 different categories, and we'll talk about the specific methods in the order listed. So, but you know, the order is based upon how restrictive the methods are. Can you give us some general principles as far as this restrictive order?
Sure. You know, I think you always start with look and feel. And I'm going to say this with a little bit of hesitation, but to some extent, the more horizontal and vertical deflection you need to add later is a reflection of maybe you didn't get the look and feel right in the first place. But that said, there is a place for that. So there's certainly a progression, and this really is an outline of what we'll present. First of all, look and feel. Talk about sort of narrowing roadways, and then we'll talk about horizontal deflection and then vertical deflection. So horizontal sort of things that make you go back and forth. Vertical is up and down. And I also think that the order here kind of reflects a thought process as well, kind of a priority listing of how you should go through your thinking process.
Great. That's yeah, really like that. And so it's really getting the first principles down. So there's also sometimes traffic diversion is mentioned, and it's lumped together with traffic calming, but you know, they're really not the same thing, are they? So maybe you can describe what the difference is between traffic calming and traffic diversion for us.
Sure. Yeah, and I just would agree with you. A lot of times what we call traffic diversion, we also call it traffic calming, and it can be, but typically it's not. This is really about moving traffic to a different street, which is something completely different. So you can see the pictures here. It could be like a diverter requiring you to turn right or left. It could be a full street closure, like in a downtown area, a partial street closure, the center picture on the bottom there, or it can be just prohibiting turns, like left turns, and you can reinforce that with a median or something like that. So those may or may not actually reduce the speed, but we'll talk about these later on.
Great. All right. So I guess the final maybe point before we get into the specific countermeasures is really the approach that communities use. You know, oftentimes we hear, as far as traffic calming, it's a request from a community, and that seems to be more of a reactive type of approach because they've got speeders going through their neighborhoods. They call up, their mayors or whatever, and they're wanting some type of traffic calming. But that, once again, it's a reactive approach. So maybe can you describe this 3-prong program approach, which seems to be beyond just that reactive?
Sure. From a agency perspective, I really think it's important that you take a comprehensive approach. So there's certainly a place for a request. People notice there's a speeding problem or an issue that comes up, and I think that works very, very well. One of the challenges with just relying on request is they may get concentrated in certain areas, say, of your community, and then leaving other areas out. So 2 other ideas that I think are important to bring to the table. One is in terms of like major institutions. This could be areas, say, around schools, hospitals, libraries, senior centers, places where vulnerable populations go. and really look on a sort of a focused areas where you want to look at managing the speed. And then I think even beyond that, you need to look at your whole community. I've used the words here, geographic equity, all streets, and really looking at making sure that when we do traffic calming, we really have a balanced approach that is inclusive of all the neighborhoods and all areas of your community.
Yeah, I think that's so important because oftentimes, when we could do public meetings, who are the ones that show up or who are the ones that complain? And it's typically not those in the lower income areas where a lot of the problems are happening. So, great point. Well, we've got some of the basic definitions and the principles explained. So let's get into some of the specific countermeasures here. We're going to start out with the street messaging or cross-sectional methods, or as you like to say, the look and feel method. And we'll start with the first one here being intersection. So, it's something that I guess intersections is, something that people maybe often overlook as far as opportunities for traffic calming. So maybe you can describe to us how this works.
Sure. And of course, this is something I think we all know is that pedestrians, bicyclists, and other vehicles too, as far as that goes, tend to get hit crossing the road, and they tend to be in many cases at intersections. So in terms of managing the speed, in terms of reducing number of crashes with a focus on safety, I think you always want to start with the intersections. And you'll notice a picture here. This is not a curb bulb or anything that's a little more invasive into the street right away. This is simply a before and after, and you can see to the right of the slide the old curb line and the new one. This is simply tightening up the curb radius and making the turning movements slower. So it all starts with speed, and it all starts with managing the speed at intersections. And I think in terms of messaging the street, this is where we always want to start. We always want to start with the intersections, and then there's a relationship, and it allows us to do everything else well. Intersections don't exist on their own, and I think quite often we create silos where we just put in curb ramps, or we just put in a signal, or just put in a marked crosswalk. And if we don't get the geometrics of the intersection right, none of those other things work as well. You may end up, for example, with just one curb ramp instead of two on the corner. So really getting the intersections correct, designing it for slower movements, and that starts to message a lot of things about the street. And what I really like about this particular picture is, again, it's the intersection plus everything else that's brought to this particular street, and it really does start to say, expect to see pedestrians, expect to see bicyclists, and you need to go at the appropriate speed.
Hey, Pete, this is Dan. Sorry. Can you use your mouse to show that old curb line that you talked about? It's at the bottom right, but
sure, I can. Okay, right. Here's the old curb line. Can you see it?
Oh, well, okay.
Okay, that's the old curb line, and then you can see the new curb line here. And so, once you manage the speed like this, of course, it not only slows the turning movement, but it reduces the exposure time for pedestrians, and in this case, a bicyclist using it. So it's going to be safer from that point of view. And the other thing that's really nice about it, of course, is that the pedestrians are going to be more visible. They're going to be out there. And I think one of the things we quite often forget is that this also really helps motorists, because if the crossing distance is shorter, you don't have to have as much walk time for the pedestrian, which means you have more green time to get the motorist through. So when you tighten up the intersections, quite often there's a little bit of improvement in the overall capacity of the intersection as well.
Great points, but as a transportation engineer, I've got to ask this question because I know it's out there. But how about trucks? And this one, actually, I was actually surprised the old line. Boy, that was a really large radius. And I suspect it looks like in this particular one, trucks can make it too. But this doesn't look like a residential neighborhood street. And oftentimes when we talk traffic calming, it seems like we're maybe talking neighborhoods in residential or cities. On collectors, can we do traffic calming on collectors and arterials? And busier streets and still accommodate trucks?
Sure, and that's a really good question. And you know, if we were doing our design course on intersections, I'd get into the details. But I think just a few basic principles are really important here. Is first of all, acknowledge that sometimes you can have a truck route or maybe a major bus route for that matter, and if that route is, say, turning right, you're going to have to go to a different design sometimes. And so that allows you to go to what I'll just call maybe the pork chop island, or some other design that works really well. But that said, I think what happens a lot of times is we design all intersections the same and without thinking about the design vehicle. Most intersections are not right turns on truck routes. And so the thinking here is the default should be something tighter, and then if needed, you can always pull it back some. So the idea is not to design all intersections the same, especially when it's not needed. The other thing to think about is the design speed of the turn. If you want to go fast, you're going to pull it back. But if you can get the overall speed of the whole street lower, trucks can make surprisingly tight turns. Where they can't make tight turns is when they're also trying to do it at a higher speed. So there's a direct relationship, again, between the overall speed of the whole, say, arterial street and then the turning movements. And then, again, there's other sort of more detailed design treatments that could be brought to it in terms if it's something that doesn't occur very often and you're turning right, sometimes it's okay to turn into the second lane if you have, say, two lanes in each direction. Also, sometimes if you have a bike lane or parking, there's the curb return, and then there's the effective curb return. So probably not very clear without those images in front of us, but to suggest that before you just design it with a very forgiving curb radii, is to look at some of the other good alternatives that are available.
Great. Yeah, so really not doing a cookie cutter design, right? So great point.
Yep.
All right, let's go to an interesting, the next topic, sidewalks and landscaping. This is one that, I don't think many people think of as sidewalks and landscaping as traffic calming, but it does create some visual friction. Can you describe the correct techniques and maybe some areas of caution with regards to, I'm going to, once again, some of our roadway designers and safety on roadways, but can you address the tree issue along certain roadways? So,
sure. Well, if you look at both of these images, both of them have street trees, both of them have sidewalks. The one on the left has parking and then a bulb out. Parking is one of those things that messages a certain amount of visual friction. Messages go slower. The one thing you'll notice on the left, too, is that the buildings define the street. In other words, and I realize we're about transportation, not land use, so this will be my only land use comment. But the buildings define the street, not a parking lot. And if you put parking lots between the building and the street, it's going to message that go faster, and it's going to message never expect to see any pedestrians here. So my only comment on the land use side is we have a lot of what I'm going to call sort of throwaway streets with throwaway architecture, and if we simply have the political will to require buildings be built on the street when they're rebuilt over a period of up to 20 years, you're going to really change the look and feel of a street, and you're going to create an expectation of seeing pedestrians and bicyclists. And one of the things we know is that when you ask a motorist who's hit a bicyclist or a pedestrian, or a motorcycle for that matter, almost always they'll say, I did not see the cyclist or the pedestrian. And probably that's true in most cases. And the reason they didn't see that person, because there wasn't an expectation to see a bicyclist or a pedestrian. So part of speed management and creating a different kind of environment is creating that expectation. So the image on the left and the one on the right, to some extent, create the expectation that there's going to be bicyclists and pedestrians. When you have that expectation, you'll see them. The skipping though over to the tree issue, and I'll just go to the image on the right. And this is obviously a relatively new environment in terms of the trees are smaller and the sidewalk looks relatively new. And it's the combination there of the bike lane, which provides a buffer to the sidewalk, the planting strip and the street trees, and then of course the pedestrian lighting, all indicate a certain scale and look and feel. And there's a bit of a paradox here with street trees, is that street trees get mature and big, and in fact if they form a canopy over a roadway, they really start messaging go slower. And of course, if we have speed limits of 40 miles an hour and more, quite often we say we got to take the trees out because people could hit them, and that could be obviously serious injury, fatality. And of course, as soon as we take the street trees out, then people go faster yet. So what I'm suggesting here is, where possible, keep the speed limits 30 or 35 miles an hour. Then you get to reinforce that with the street trees. And the good news is that in urban areas, you can keep a speed limit at 35 miles an hour with the street trees and really not sacrifice capacity. Once you start going faster than that, and I'm not talking about freeways here, you get a lot of disadvantages in terms of crash severity, and you really don't gain anything in terms of capacity of the street. One of the myths out there, I think, is that we need to go fast to get the cars through, and of course getting motor vehicles through is all about the intersections. So it's a little counterintuitive, and I always like to bring up, we're not going to talk about modern roundabouts, but I think in terms of understanding something here that's sort of counterintuitive, it's worth it to think of the modern roundabout. The modern roundabout works really well in terms of safety, reducing crashes of all modes, but also it does so well because it reduces the speed, and it actually handles more motor vehicles, and it really facilitates traffic flow. So it's a really good example of going slower to get more, and kind of addresses that counterintuitive sense of the relationship between capacity and speed.
All right, great points. And I'm just going to also state that I don't see it in this picture, but if you had parking and other types of buffers like bike lanes and so forth, having those trees, it does create for the vehicles some safety. Obviously, we're wanting to balance the safety for all road users, and I know within federal highways, trees, we have actually a video called "A Delicate Balance." And so, although it's controversial, I appreciate you addressing that question. So let's go next to, here's a nice option with regards to the buffers. So once again, if you have these buffers, the trees is not as much of an issue, getting that 4 to 6 foot offset, maybe even in the 30 to 35 mile per hour roadway. But it just enhances the walking environment. And I'll tell you, I'd prefer to drive and walk or bike along the images that you have shown rather than some of these throwaway arterial streets that we often, many times, drive down. So.
Yeah, and the main point here is simply that sidewalks always need a buffer, and it can be parked cars, it can be a bike lane, it can be a planting strip, it can be a bulb out, but you really need that buffer. And I think too quickly, quite often, we take out the parking at the expense of the pedestrian.
I'd agree with you. Okay, gateways. These are, the one on the left. Obviously, it's maybe into Chinatown. It's really telling you're coming into a district, and but there's other ways that can be done. The one on the right is a little more subtle, but and these, doing just one treatment like the one on the left probably isn't going to keep that whole district going slow. So they probably combined with other treatments. Can you give some guidance with regards to the proper uses, ways to design and utilize gateways?
Yeah, I think you introduced it really well, and I think the idea too is that almost always it's going to take a combination of treatments, and I'll show you an image in a minute here with how pavers can also be used as a gateway. But the idea is behind it is there's always a change, and there's always something that sort of suggests a visual narrowing. And certainly you get it with the image on the left, but also on the right, that sort of things tighten up and that you're going into a different space. And I'll just go to the next slide here. It's gateway combined with some of these other features. And so you can just see on the left some installation. But I really like this image on the right as well, because it's used as a gateway to symbolize a transition between more of a neighborhood area and a neighborhood commercial area. But it's using the pavers, the color, everything here to send a visual cue to the motorist that things have changed. It's bringing in the aesthetics, and it's also part of the gateway, if you will. And there's a lot of challenges, and we'll show this in a minute with pavers. I'm not making an advertisement for all pavers in all places. There's a lot of considerations here, but the basic idea is that we can use everything in the visual environment to really give a sense of something different. The other thing I would just say about aesthetics, and it's both with the image here, but also the earlier images when we showed the street trees and the sidewalks and some of the other things, is that, and again, this is a little off topic, but I think it's worth mentioning once, is that there's a direct relationship between aesthetics and economic development. The companies today can relocate and pretty much go anywhere. One of their challenges is to get the qualified workforce. People want to live in places that have good walking and biking opportunities, that are aesthetically pleasing, that are attractive, that have centers, just like the image on the right. So I would never skimp on the aesthetics. It's part of what's going to make your community a great place to work and live.
I'd agree with you. I live in the Northwest, but that image on the right sort of is appealing in the winter, and so I would definitely go visit that location. So, and maybe a good transition with regards to pavers, because as you stated, there are some issues with pavers, right? There's different ways to do it, so maybe you can talk about some of the considerations
yeah. This is just a caution, is that whenever you use brick, it's going to cost more. It can be bumpy. You've got to be committed to the maintenance. So the pavers don't have to be where the pedestrians are. It can be other places as well, like in the planting strip. So do the aesthetic, but always just consider some of these other things, especially with ADA considerations. You don't want more than a 1/4-inch lip, and you really don't want it too bumpy. I know when my kids were in strollers and they would be sleeping, and I'd come to something and go brrr, and you go across it and they wake up. So a lot of considerations. So I'm not saying don't do it or don't do it, just consider all the different complications that go with it.
Sure. And there are options with regards to stamp, right, and brush concrete that really give that same aesthetic look, but doesn't have it. And as you mentioned, my wife used to be in a wheelchair, and fortunately she's better now, but we'd go across some of these, bricks, and it is, if you have spinal injuries, it can be a challenge, or it can be painful. So great points, great warnings. Okay, our next method is slow zones, and these are sort of neighborhood-wide. I haven't had a lot of experience. I think you have, so maybe you can describe. It's not something that I hear a lot of, but maybe you can describe to our audience a little more about how these work.
Sure, and like all the treatments we're going to discuss, if you ask me, is this a good idea, and I'm going to say it depends. Like most things, this one needs to be done in the right place and the right time, but it can be very effective if it's done in the right place. Just starting with safety, we know when we look at pedestrian crashes, they tend to not congregate necessarily at a particular intersection, but very often they congregate along a corridor, or they may be concentrated in a neighborhood. So just direct your eye to the upper right, and when you can see more of a traditional grid pattern here. And so the slow zones that certainly I've been involved in over the years, and the ones that work well, tend to be areas with a lot of pedestrians, typically more high density, a place where the neighborhood is very involved, and you can see on the upper left here, Vision 0. And so it's places where there's a real community support and surge for doing something different. And I've seen them done where pretty much all the streets are included in a slow zone, or it could be more focused on the arterial streets, thinking that the residential streets are already fairly slow. But getting a lot more interest in this And so in addition to focusing on, neighborhoods where there's safety issues, higher density, a lot of pedestrians, it might be also a place where there's a lot of schools, other attractors. The key on this, though, is that you really do want to bring in the community, get that public support, and make it a collaborative effort.
Great. One quick thought, though, with regard to the slow zones in the neighborhood. Is every street in that area, even the arterials, the same speed limit, or how does that work? Is it certain roads that are faster than others, or slower than others, or just is it the entire neighborhood?
Well, again, you can do it in two ways, either just the entire neighborhood or just certain streets, but it's also very often that you have different speeds. And so I've seen a lot of communities, like on the neighborhood streets, pushing to put up the speed limit at, say, 20 miles an hour, and maybe on the arterial streets it might be 25. So you can have them all the same, or you can certainly differentiate too.
Okay, thanks. Well, we do actually have a case study that I was made aware of, and so let me just give you, the fact that the slow zones do work. This is out of New York City, the DOT in the Claremont neighborhood. It's a very residential area, and it was delineated by an elevated train, industrial zone, and a highway. And it ranked first in the number as far as the killed or serious injured pedestrians per 100,000 population, and ranked number 2 for the total number of schools in the neighborhood. And so they actually did have some pedestrian fatality between the years of 2005 and 2009. And so they, the neighborhood got together and worked with the DOT, New York City DOT, and created the neighborhood slow zone program. The slow zones were in the residential areas, as mentioned, and it was about a 1/4 square mile, or 5 city blocks. And they deployed not just one traffic calming measure, but several, and as we talked about, putting several of these together to help with that self-enforcing 20-mile-per-hour speed limit. And so the slow zones generally were defined, as far as the boundaries. They had these natural boundaries with the roadways, rail lines, and the commercial zones. So let's, as far as the solution, they came up, they used the gateways, as you can see from the images down there. Not like a Chinatown, but obviously distinct. They used markings here and some signs. And then into the neighborhood entryways is where they put them into. And then they did road markings, as you can see, put 20 miles per hour into the streets as well. And they also did some education and informing drivers that they were entering this area. So, 1 or 2 parking spots were removed to install the gateway treatment. There are some speed bumps that were also used, and we'll talk about more about that a little later. And then especially the markings, the 20 mile per hour was used throughout the entire residential area. So let's get to some of the results here, which is great because, they reached the neighborhood, it was very favorable. Police officers reported less aggressive driving in the area. The 85th percentile speed was reduced about at 6 of the 7 locations where they put in speed humps. It was neighborhood had it was simple, and it was just used standard treatments. Some of that we're going to be talking about, and only required crash and speed data to really verify that. So quite the success story here. And this was the only, I guess they said there was one issue in January 2012. About half of the in-street gateway signs were damaged by the vehicle. So not sure how that's happening. I'm looking at those signs there, and they're looks like they're on pretty sturdy mount, but there must have been maybe something going on to damage those, but I think sort of minor compared to, rather hit the sign, pedestrian, right? Okay, let's go to the next, we've got our horizontal deflection category here with the mini circles, chokers, chicanes, serpentine streets, and then how to do some of these on a trial and temporary installation. So let's talk about mini circles. And I know you love these, Peter, because the city of Seattle has put in quite a few of these. How many altogether would you say?
Well, I know it's over 1,200, but something like that, yep.
All right. So, these are not modern roundabouts, right? These are in neighborhood areas, and so there is a difference between mini circles and roundabouts, correct? We can expand.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. And by the way, we spend a lot of time just more on the passive messaging of a street. And now we're going to go through some of these specific treatments, and I'm going to go a little bit faster because these are things that you can look up and probably familiar with. And these come in a way after you've done everything else. So really, again, think of it as a progression of different steps that you might go through. But with regard to the mini circles, again, they're not modern roundabouts. There's simply a circle in the middle of the road. Every one is a different size because there's size to the street. So if you have two streets that are different sizes, like one's 26 feet and one's 36 feet, you're going to end up with a little mini circle, something that looks more like a kidney than a circle. Yeah, they're individually designed, and you also see the fact that they have a concrete little apron around them, and that allows for bigger trucks to get through if necessary, or fire trucks and things like that. But they, of all the, at least when I've looked at the data, of all the different things you can do in terms of an intervention, these are going to give you about a 90% reduction in all types of crashes. So they're very, very effective, and they can work really well.
Hey, Pete, this is Dan. Jump in here, but if an agency, if you were trying to talk an agency into taking a four-way stop, and instead you may be using one of these neighborhood traffic circles, I mean, what sort of arguments would you make for this design as opposed to a four-way stop?
Sure. First of all, you're going to dramatically reduce the number of crashes. I just flipped the screen on that. Good question, anticipating that. So just, if you do have a crash, you tend to have a side swipe here and not the really horrific, crashes where somebody runs a stop sign and goes into somebody going through. So it really both reduces the number of crashes and also the severity of crashes. The other thing that's a real benefit is reducing noise. And if any of you have ever lived on a corner with stop signs, you know that there's a lot of noise with people stopping and starting. And so this becomes a really good alternative. And then the other part I just like is the landscaping. You either, I think the example on the right is good. You either want to keep the landscaping really low, or you can plant a tree, but then trim it up, 8 to 10 feet so that you can see through it. And it can work extremely well. So I would encourage people who are interested in this one to go to the City of Seattle's neighborhood traffic control website under Seattle Department of Transportation, and they have all the details there of how it works and outcomes and things like that.
Great. Yep, I wish we'd put more of them in. Okay, next one, chokers. These narrow up, can you tell us a little more how about, and the next few categories actually are sort of similar in the principles, but can you describe with regards to chokers and when you might use them and some cautions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are just examples of horizontal deflection. The first one I showed you was at an intersection. This is something you're going to tend to do at mid-block. You do have to make sure that you sign it appropriately, and the key on these is you really have to have a good visual view of what's going on, so that if you do go into the narrowed area, and if it's only allowing, let's say, one motor vehicle through at a time, that you can see an oncoming vehicle. So you really want to look at the sight distances on this. But it also can serve as a gateway transition between, say, a neighborhood area and a commercial. And of course, it does create some space, again, for additional landscaping from time to time.
Okay, great. I think you actually hit those. I guess the one issue, though, is working with the first responders and making sure that they're comfortable with these and they can get their fire trucks through, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is just shows that is you want to make sure you can get through, and you still want it wide enough that bike access that works. If you do put it, you can certainly put in bulb outs and narrow a street, and that visual narrowing will have some effect. But one of the things you need to think about is, do you want to have room for one lane or two? And to be real clear about that, what you don't want is kind of in between where people try to use it as two and it really works as one and it's confusing. So again, just some clarity on that is good.
Great. Our next one is chicanes, which is somewhat similar to, I guess if you did a combination placement, it could be like a joker, but these are a little different. So can you sort of explain when you might use a chicane?
Sure. Again, this is a horizontal traffic control, and again, it's to kind of manage the speed, introduce some visual friction. I think the key here to think about too is that, and this is where that combination comes in, is that you can do a chicane like shown on the right, but keep the 2 lanes of travel. And what I like about the image on the right is it also keeps the bike lane through. You can see it on the left there. In the next image, I'll show you another one where it really just goes down to 1 lane. So in a way, it's a choker, but it's also a chicane. And so again, it's that combination. If you look at the left too, you'll see the little gap there for the drainage. On all of these, you really need to think through the drainage.
Okay. Just one question with the image there. I see that they put some trees, vegetation in there. Should there be lighting over these locations? Because at night, if maybe people don't necessarily, I don't know if maybe putting delineators and so that they know that these are out there. Any thoughts on that with regards to, you don't want vehicles to crash into the trees, correct? So
no. And if you look at the image on the right, and it doesn't show that real clearly, but you can see that there's reflective materials that are put up, and usually you want to put, and even the image here on the left, you can see the little delineators on the pavement there. But yeah, you definitely want to put reflective materials on it, and then and on an as-needed basis, you also want to look at the overhead lighting, make sure that the visibility is good.
Great. And I guess another question for all of these is like, I see some signs here. What type of signing possibly? Should we have advanced signing for all of these in addition?
Yeah, I think you, in general, again, depending on visibility, there's a lot of opportunities for warning signs, black and yellow signs, and certainly letting folks know and having the signs up that things are, what's happening there. I found that in general, if you do the signing and you have the lighting and you have the reflectivity, and you do it on streets that are pretty low volume residential streets we're looking at here, they work quite well.
Okay. All right, let's go to Serpentine. Similar concept, maybe talk a little bit about Serpentine design. Sure.
Again, this one can be expensive. This is something that, quite often is done when, but I'll also give you a cheap way to do it. You can see on the upper left a residential street, and just building in the serpentine to change the look and feel. But you can also do it on an arterial street, and you see the image below. They added, this one happens to be a bike boulevard on an arterial street, and you can see where they added just a spot bit of bike lane there to get through the turn. A couple that I've been involved in over the years on, say, on arterial streets in neighborhood commercial areas. One way to do that quite cheaply is you put in back and angle parking on one side of the street, parallel on the other, and then if you have short blocks, say 300 feet long to 400 feet long, then each block you switch it. So you go through the intersection, and the back and angle parking goes on one side and the parallel on the other. So you just get that serpentine effect through a neighborhood commercial area where you really want people going slow anyways. And what's really nice about it is if you go to the angle parking, you actually end up with more parking and again, change the look and feel. So it can be very costly, but there's also ways of doing it a little bit cheaper. But certainly when you start looking at driveways, drainage, utilities, those are all things that could really bring the cost up.
Great little tips there. Okay. Our next slide deals with the trials and temporary installation, because oftentimes when you're wanting to put these in, you can have some resistance, right? So I think maybe you can talk a little bit about the the pros and cons.
Sure. A lot of times when you're doing something for the first time, you want to try it on an interim or temporary basis. A couple of rules of thumb is that you always do it at a location where you have almost 100% chance of having it work really well. So especially when you're doing something for the first, second, or third time, you really want to be careful about those locations, because if it fails, you probably don't have permission to ever try it again. And if it works really well, then you have permission to do it over and over. So it's really when you're introducing sort of a new idea, is where you maybe want to do something temporary. I know, for example, some of the mini circles I showed you before that I worked on when they were first being introduced in some neighborhoods, they were done on a temporary basis. But now, once you have success and they're everywhere, you don't need to do the temporary ones anymore. So it's really part of the outreach process and something that you may not need to do forever. That said, a few things to be careful about. One is they can be kind of ugly, and so you can see from the pictures here that they aren't always pretty, and so I think you just have to, when you have that conversation with the neighborhood, is to really make sure that they know that it is going to be kind of ugly, and that if they do finalize it, make a permanent one, that can change. And then obviously snow is a huge issue. None of the treatments you see here work with snow. So if you're in a community that doesn't have snow, obviously it's a non-issue. If you do, you're probably looking at, depending on the months that you have snow, doing something, say, from May through September or whatever the case may be, with the idea that you're probably going to take it out during the snow season. For example, on the lower left, the plow comes through once and that curbing is gone. So just another consideration.
Okay, great. There is next. There's a case study that we were going to cover, but I think just for the sake of time, people are going to be able to download these, and I think that there's several case studies that they can look through. But as you can probably guess, all of these had a pedestrian or speeding issue, and then the results, they put in some traffic calming measure methods, and they had some really good results. So, but you can definitely get, when you download the PDF version of this, go ahead and read through those, and you can contact those areas as far as more details if you need. So let's go to the vertical deflection, or what like you like to refer to as up and downs, right? So we've got three here: the speed humps, tables, and cushions.
Yeah, just very quickly in speed humps, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I think people are fairly familiar with these, but you can do design speeds, different design speeds, and obviously you want the lower ones if you're going to have more first responders to the area. Sometimes you can have higher ones. Mostly used on residential streets, but I've seen them used everywhere. And one of the things to be concerned about here is just the use of these on steep hills, because it is possible, like if it's an area that's not well lit, and if it's a bike boulevard or something, and you're going downhill, and you hit one of these at a high speed, if you don't see it, that can be a problem. So just be a little thoughtful and careful about where you put them in. But certainly they can be effective. They are going to create a little bit of noise, and sometimes they work really best if used in a combination with other kinds of traffic calming.
Okay, I see a pattern here. So a lot of things in combination. In this image, it looks like it looks like they've got some provisions for larger vehicles. Are we talking probably fire trucks here?
Yeah, quite often you can do it for fire trucks, sometimes certain kinds of delivery trucks, and this can work fairly well, though quite often I think is that you can also, people will be attracted to those gaps, and they'll try to at least get one set of wheels in them. So sometimes you get people going down the street, not where you want them to be. They might be in the center of the street or something. So you just have to be a little careful about where you put the gaps.
Okay. Yeah, and that roadway looks like it's a residential area, and that's too wide. So and these verticals probably more of a reactive type of countermeasure, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and with the reactive, you can do the permanent, or you can once again here do temporary, right?
Yeah, just show this. There's a lot of different products on the market, and a lot of times people want to try these, and so they can be put in as temporary, move them around, or they can be permanent. Again, you can see here, you can create the gaps for like the bus on the right in some communities. May or may not be attractive, again, the issue of avoidance. But there's a lot of good products out there, and just be thoughtful about how people will use these if you install them. Okay.
Hey guys, this is Dan. I want to cut in just a couple more questions on this since we're on it. Two questions really. One, there's some questions about instead of a speed hump, is there anything that creates a speed dip into the road? And if so, kind of what are the concerns about maybe using something like that? My thought initially would be gathering of water and other debris, things like that. But I wanted to confirm with you all on that. And then the other question is for the cut-throughs for the bus wheels. I assume you want to do that for bicyclists as well. But is there any concern about kind of debris and other things gathering in the spacing, creating maybe other hazards for bicyclists who might be using the middle sections of the speed humps?
Sure, and I think you've just answered the question. When you do a dip down, you've got an immediate maintenance issue. You've created a river across your roadway, and then also certainly you need to look at how it's going to drain when you do something like this, and it could catch debris, and it could mean that you have to do sweeping more often. So yeah, those are all good points.
Okay, our next method is the speed tables, similar to speed humps, but a little bit different. So can you tell us the distinction?
Sure. This is very similar, but quite often they're used in combinations with either formal or informal pedestrian crossings where you can walk across. And the top one's an informal one. The bottom one, again, is a more formal one. That picture is taken in Seattle, California Avenue. There's a couple of them. And then, again, you really want to look at first responders. Is this a bus route? By the way, the one on the lower left is a bus route, and it's a first responder route. But it was designed to make sure that the vehicles could get across and do it well. A lot of these, the most expensive part of it's going to be the drainage, and you might have to, to get it to drain two ways or something like that. But yeah, they can be very, very effective. In this case, a mid-block crossing.
So I guess a quick question regarding speed tables and speed humps. The design can be done to accommodate various speeds, right? The vehicles will take. So if they're not going that speed, then it's uncomfortable. But if they're hitting that sort of that ideal speed, then it's not so bad.
Yeah, there could be speed tables that are designed to actually slow you up, or you can design it so that if you're going what is the desired speed, say in a neighborhood commercial area, maybe you want it not more than 25. You can design it that way, and so it's really just topping off the higher speed folks. So there's a lot of different ways, and I think just like I showed before, you can design them from 15 to 30 miles an hour, depending on the situation.
Right. Great. And I think you did talk about the drainage. That's always among the design engineers is, how do you deal with the drainage? And it looks like here's a great example along the side that they had some great to let the water drain. So, and then they actually use this as a raised crosswalk. And so,
and you can see this is expensive because you're putting 4 drain grates in both sides of the street.
Okay. So we're going to go into next, we talked about our traffic calming, and as you stated, there is a difference between traffic calming and traffic diversion. So let's quickly cover sort of the 4 different methods for traffic diversion here, and the first one being the diverters.
Sure, and this is probably the most traditional one that we usually think of, and this just prevents through motor vehicle traffic, so it forces a left turn or right turn. There's some basic different kinds of design, so which I won't cover right now, but the idea that the motor vehicles turn and then you provide a way for the bicyclists and pedestrians to get through. So quite often it's used in conjunction with bike boulevards, but there's also a lot of potential downsides of this, and so I'll hit those on the next slide here. It's certainly what I always call the toothpaste effect. If you don't allow people to use one street, they're going to go to a different street. So you always want to do this within the context of a larger neighborhood traffic plan or transportation plan. It can actually cause more traffic because now you have to go around the block, for example, to get to your house. And so in terms of vehicle miles driven, it could also increase that. Typically, it doesn't reduce speed. So again, it depends what you're trying to do. There's, of course, issues with first responders, other delivery. So I'm not saying don't do it, but just this one here, you probably want to do more study, put more thought into it than you would for some of the other traffic calming measures we discussed.
Okay. And then there's also partial street closures.
Yeah, this one's quite often very popular. It usually just means that you can't go into a street. You can come out, but once you're on the street, it's two-way. What's nice about it is emergency vehicles can just break the rules and go in, so that's not an issue. You do get the concerns again of it could create actually more traffic, and again, you also have a high level of non-compliance, and I think I mentioned that on the next slide. So again, you really got to be thoughtful about where you do this and do it as part of a larger neighborhood plan. Megan?
Right. Yeah, I can see that because if somebody came and closed off half my road and made me go around, I'd probably be a little upset. So I think that's very important. And all of these involving the community, correct?
Yeah, and you can just see from this example here, this was taken in Portland, part of a bike boulevard, so partial closure. It works really well. It's relatively cheap, but you just have to be, again, consider some of the downsides as I talked about, and they would apply to something like this as well.
And oftentimes we talk about emergency responders, but I like the last bullet where you really need to talk with the sanitary department as well as far as the trash pickup too. So definitely coordination with all the stakeholders involved.
Yep.
Okay. And then, full street closures. How often do you do that? When is it appropriate?
Yeah, again, I think we're all familiar with full street closures, and they've had kind of a mixed history in different cities. They can work really well, but sometimes they don't work as well, too. Usually they allow for pedestrian and bike access. Obviously, you have to design them for emergency vehicle access. There's the issue of diversion again. If you can't use one street, you're going to use another. And so you always got to do, a very, very thorough neighborhood traffic plan, look at the implications, again, the toothpaste effect. And then, of course, a lot of what drives this is the economic impacts. Not going to talk about that now, but other than to note it's an important consideration, and you can find examples where it's been really good from an economic point of view and other places where it's been a challenge. So just things to think about.
Right. And you can actually do those full street closures temporarily, right? I've seen a lot of places do that, and it worked well. And that we actually went to a permanent Santa Monica, I think, 3rd Street down in Santa Monica. They do that. It started out that way, I believe.
That's a really good point. Is that I think most communities now, for example, have farmers markets and things like that, where they look at their streets from a more of a module point of view, and so they close a street, say maybe on a Saturday morning or something like that, with no intent of even ever doing that permanently. But it's a good way to think of a street as sort of modular, meeting needs, days, different times.
All right. Okay, left turn prohibitions. I know sometimes I don't like these, but obviously there's a time and place for it. So maybe you can help us describe when it's appropriate.
Sure. There's some places you may want to prohibit a left turn for any variety of reasons. It could be that it's a dead-end street and you just want to make sure people don't make a mistake, or maybe it's a neighborhood cut-through that really doesn't need to be there because a block up you have a better street and you want to encourage people to do it. There's a lot of good reasons to do it. All the same rules apply here again for all diversion, because you're diverting traffic to a different street if you can't make a left turn, and so again you want to do it within the context of a larger neighborhood transportation plan. It actually may increase the capacity of the street, and if that's what you're looking for, that could be good, because if you can't make a left turn, that inside lane probably can have more capacity going through a straight. One of the big advantages, of course, of this is that it eliminates left turn crashes, which we all know are one of the higher types of crashes that we see.
Yep, I would agree with you. And even though sometimes it is a little frustrating, I definitely, it's a win-win for both the pedestrians on those left turns, but also for vehicles because it does have a high or the good crash reduction factor for vehicles as well, especially the older people having a hard time negotiating those left turns. So I will, I don't mind them when it's for safety. So,
okay, there you go.
But there are some considerations, aren't there?
Yeah, and this is just a good example. This one happens to be in Seattle. It was one I worked on a few years ago, and you can't see the street it's turning left onto, but there was two intersections really close together, and they were having some issues. And as an example, through the median, they eliminated the left turn for motor vehicles, but it was onto a residential street where bicyclists need to go, and so this was a good solution, and it worked really, really well. And because there's another street, you can see it there just on the top of the image, there was other options for emergency access and things like that. So in this case, it worked out really, really well.
Great. Gotta love engineering. That's what we do, is solve problems, and that's part of the fun job. And so there's some creative things here. Appreciate that. Now, the next one is the sign prohibitions. I know, I see a lot of these, and it says various times of days and hours and so forth. If you can talk a little bit about that, and then how the enforcement, because if there's not a cop there, I see people actually still not obeying those signs. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, and really this, I put this image in here just because so many communities have these. But not necessarily as a strong recommendation, if you will. It's really hard to do these in a good way over time because people have to know what time it is and get used to the idea of certain times and what day of the week it is, and so when you do these kinds of hourly restrictions, and that's the common theme on all these, you really have to combine it with some enforcement, some education, and sometimes some either physical barriers, say, that prevent you from almost like a partial closure during certain hours. I've seen around schools on residential streets where they'll add some barriers into the street. Even a person standing there, sometimes a community officer, sometimes a crossing guard, but really making sure that it works.
All right. And the next shows one where I thought it was quite interesting, and I haven't seen it myself, but maybe it happens more often than not, using the signs to create part-time one-way streets. Can you explain where this would be appropriate?
Sure. And again, same comments. Do this with great caution. Again, I'm showing this because I know a lot of communities do it. The most common place that I've seen it is around schools, where you have a lot of pickup and drop-off, a lot of school bus, and yet that circulation that's so critical for working of the school, and I think the middle sign here catches it very well, is during certain periods of the day, that's really the only thing that works. So in addition to the signs, you're really going to want people out there kind of directing the traffic and make sure that it's done correct.
All right. So we've got a final case study, but I'm going to ask my show producer here, D'Angeline, how we're doing as far as the number of questions that have been coming in. And so, Dan, are there a lot of questions? Because I'd like to address the issues that the people of the audience has. Otherwise, we could probably do the last case study.
I'd say if you can spend about 2 or 3 minutes on the case study, if you think it'll go that fast, then we can get into the questions.
Okay, I think I can cover it that quickly. Once again, you'll probably guess the outcome here, but this one was in Portland, Oregon, and it was in a school zone, and they were doing traffic calming. It was Sabin Elementary School, and the safety issues once again existed along 2 arterial streets crossed by many students walking, biking to school. And so this, in 1997, Portland Traffic Calming Program, glad that they have a traffic calming program. I'd recommend that for a lot of agencies. They took on a school safety project and to improve the student safety. looks like staff, parents, and they got the entire community involved with this. So we've been recommending throughout this presentation, and just getting the different stakeholders involved. Let's go to the, and they obviously discussed the different issues there. So the solution that they came up with, and Peter talked about the diverters. They use a semi-diverter installed on 17th and 18th Streets, which encouraged a clockwise circulation pattern around the school. So it sort of goes back to that last slide, Peter, with, that you covered with the signs. This creates which created a predominant northbound traffic on 17th and 18th in the 2-block region, and they expected to increase in speeding due to the one-way circulation, but that actually didn't happen. And so they had actually installed some curb humps, which they later took out. But they installed these for 3 months. And they did some follow-up data. And let's go to the final slide there with the results. And you can see that the traffic flow around the school changed from two-way to one-way clockwise. Potential two-way traffic conflicts where space existed for only one vehicle was significantly reduced. For pedestrian crosses, only one direction of traffic at a time, and the test showed that speed did not increase as feared. So as stated, they took out the speed humps, and so some positive benefits here. See, the new inverters does not have intense landscaping stated, but just a really good success story. Once again, using multiple types of countermeasures. But also the other key point here is really having everybody, the stakeholders involved. So the last two slides, we've got some resources for you as far as there's an article by Huang and Mixiniki, who's actually another one of our instructors for the Federal Highway Focused Approach Program. And they did a summary of speed hump evaluations, and you can see the bullet points there. And then the next slide, you look at these as you download the PowerPoints or the PDFs. But another couple good references with the websites is the PedSafe. If you go into the countermeasures, talk about a lot of the different countermeasures, the traffic calming measures that Peter talked about, and then there's also the ITE traffic calming website link, which also talks about a lot of the ones that Peter that we've discussed today on the show. So with that, Dan, why don't we go ahead, and I've got probably about looks like 13 minutes for questions. So let's bring them on.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Peter and Pete, for that great presentation. I'd add, and guys, I'm going to leave your slide up, Peter, your slide up right now, just so people can keep writing down these resources. I would add trafficcalming.org into the mix in terms of a good traffic calming resource online. It's easy to use and got a lot of good information. So take a look at that one as well. We've got a lot of questions, and I'm sorry I won't be able to get to all of them, but what I wanted to do is hit on some of the recurring topics and themes. The first off, this whole series, we're talking about pedestrian safety specifically, and so one thing I'd like you guys to touch on quickly is what do we know and don't we know about traffic calming and its ability to reduce crashes and injuries and fatalities with respect to pedestrians. I go into the CMF crash modification factors clearinghouse and look for different traffic calming measures that were presented here. Will I find much in the way of crash effectiveness? And can you talk about maybe what could be learned by doing some more research?
Do you want to start, Peter?
Well, with regards to that's a really good question, because there's in the pedestrian and bicycle area, I'll include, we've sort of been lagging in some of these areas with regards to the research, and we're playing catch up. And so there is more different types of countermeasures that we're trying to get crash modification, crash reduction factors on. Regarding the particular ones that we presented today, I have not actually seeing that, but I need to go in and probably do a more intense look, and so I don't want to state whether we have those on every single one or not at this point, but I have to do a little more research on that.
Yeah, and I would just add to it two things. One is with the focus on Vision Zero and really, getting to that and getting rid of fatalities. There's a lot of new research going on around the country right now, looking at what do we really need to do to get rid of those crashes. And so I would sort of echo what you just said, Peter. Stay tuned. I think you're going to see a lot of good research come out in the next 2 years, 3 years. The other thing I would suggest is this, when you look around the country, you see dramatically different rates of both serious injuries, crashes, and fatalities around the country. And if you start looking at it per capita, you'll notice that it's very high in some places and low in others. And I think, at least from my experience, and I think I've worked in about 240 communities now, is that the one common denominator in terms of a variable factor is overall speed limits in a given area. And those communities that figure out ways to manage their speeds from a systemic community region-wide level have lower crash rates. And that's not tying it to a specific treatment, which we have crash reduction factors and crash modification factors for some of those, not all of them. But I think as a general statement, it's really all about speed.
Yeah,
right. And I just to add to that, although we don't necessarily have the crash modification factors, we do, and I'm seeing, looking at on my screen, the resource slide with regards to the speed bumps and their effectiveness, and we do know that they actually do slow speeds down, and we also know, based upon speeds with regards to serious injuries and fatalities at the higher speeds. I think everyone's familiar with the United Kingdom study, where at 40 miles per hour or higher, you're 85% chance that you're going to end up having a fatality. So we know that speeds do affect the crash, but as far as each specific countermeasure, I don't think we have that research.
For the next question, I actually want to read a really great comment or two from an attendee here, and I'll ask a follow-up question. But he points out that streets should be calmed by design instead of through these expensive and sometimes controversial retrofits. It's quite worthwhile to overhaul a city or county street standards that affect the improvement and the effective improvement in the street design will make these sorts of retrofits, sort of unnecessary. So I'd like to ask, how can you draw parallels between sort of what you've shown here is but going back and doing, and with the understanding that a lot of what we're doing is retrofits of these roads that have been built to a capacity that they can't be sustained or to a safety standard that we need to revisit. But how worthwhile is it to take the same principles and really look more at what design standards we're using to design our streets in the first place and kind of looking at things from a more holistic approach like complete streets and some of these other ideas?
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Sure. Why don't I just start? I mean, a great comment, and I think that's what we're saying from the beginning is you always start with the messaging of a street so people automatically go the right speed, and then we have to come in with intervention later. That said, probably 90% of the urban environment that's going to be here in 30 years is already here. And when we didn't build it right, we have to go back and do some retrofitting, even though it's expensive and invasive and sometimes not always popular. So, we need to be looking longer term, the look and feel of a street. And I gave the example of bringing buildings up to the street, but we also sometimes need to do more direct intervention.
Yeah, and completely agree with the statement, and I think that's one of the reasons when we started off, it's slide 6, so if you remember, at the top of that, the first bullet was the look and feel, and then going to the narrowing the roadway, talked about less restrictive, more restrictive. So if you start out correctly, and then as we go further down with the vertical deflection type of categories, that's more the retrofit. So yeah, agree, it's better to do it right from the get-go, but we're encouraged that a lot of agencies are starting to redo those streets with complete streets designs.
Throughout this entire series, Peter, I'll put this question to you. Throughout the whole series, we've had a lot of emphasis on how to look at what the countermeasure we're talking about in the context of what is allowed within the MUTCD, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. Didn't get a lot of mention of the MUTCD here today, and so I guess my general question is, of the items that were shared, I mean, what of these can be considered traffic control devices, and how much does the MUTCD really weigh in on traffic calming measures in general? What do we need to be concerned about to make sure things we're doing are in compliance?
Well, on some of these we saw the markings, I believe, but the MUTCD does cover, like the speed hump is a traffic control device that you're trying to, and so the traffic circles, and so it would encourage people to go to those sections in the MUTCD and look up whether it's a shall or a should or an option condition. And so obviously we didn't have enough time to go into all the details here, give you the general principles, but yes, anytime you're trying to control the traffic, other than the look and the feel, obviously that's not going to be covered in there, but the other types of the horizontal and the vertical deflection, trying to control traffic, the MUTCD will have the information in there on how to properly use those. And was there a second part to the question? I sort of forgot.
You hit it. Thank you very much.
Okay.
One question, a lot of the treatments you showed, there's ranges of costs associated with each of these. For cities and towns that are looking for low-cost measures that they can think about applying on their streets where they have, and with the understanding that problems will differ from street to street, from road to road, what sort of low-cost traffic calming measures, maybe 2 or 3, would you say are ones that you really like and you think have been used well and can be used well, even with sort of a limited budget?
I'll start out with just a first thought. I have a slide sometimes I use, and it's called Paint is Your Friend. And I think a lot of times simply reintroducing parking or changing parallel parking to back and angle parking are things that can really change the look and feel of your street. They're good for economic development, and they really start to message a street differently. I think that's an example of something that's relatively cheap that you can institute without a lot of cost. The other one that I mentioned, it takes longer, but it just takes political will. It does not take a lot of money, and that's simply to change your zoning so that you don't put cars between buildings and streets, and you change the look and feel. And so again, that's something that doesn't cost much money, but it can have a huge impact over time. And then the other thing I always tell people to look at is just about every community does resurfacing. And so when you do the resurfacing, that's the opportunity to road diet, do the lane diet, do something different that really starts to change, again, how the street operates.
You just covered what I was wanting to talk about. In road diets, it can be, if you're piggybacking on another project, the resurfacing project can be very low cost. And it is one of Federal Highway's Everyday Counts initiative, and it isn't one that we put here in the traffic calming methods, just because I think we covered it in other areas, and hopefully everybody's very familiar with it. That can be very low cost. So I agree with you.
And just as a final point here, you talked about traffic calming as sort of self-enforcing, but I think we were talking a lot about speed, a lot about speed limits versus design speeds and things like that, and we're getting a few folks pointing out that enforcement is a critical partner in all of this as well. If you're thinking about speed, I think the person made the case that it's a low-cost treatment. I'm not sure it's all it can be, I think, if you have good partnerships. But I think that in all cases, a little bit of enforcement can probably go a long way. I don't know how you all feel about that.
I always, when I use the number 85%, I made it up, so I'm going to make this up here, but I've tried it and gotten good feedback on it. is that if you design the road so 85% of the people are doing the right thing, a little bit of enforcement can be very, very effective on the other 15%. But if you design a roadway where 85% of the people are going way over the speed limit, like 20 miles over, because it's just a huge gap between the messaging of the road and the speed limit, you know, you can bring in a lot of enforcement, but you have to keep it there all the time, and that can get expensive. So I really think that you need to do the combination, design it right, and then that little bit of added enforcement makes a huge difference.
And I'll just add, going back to our points with regards to involving the community, different stakeholders, and have law enforcement there to, you know, because we do use in safety the 3 E's, 4 E's approach, and they are a critical part. So, agreed.
Great. Well, thank you so much, guys. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for discussion today. I am sorry if we didn't get to your question. I'd encourage you to reach out to us if there's a follow-up question that you're wondering about. We'd love to be able to connect you to the right people or the right resources for that. Once again, I just want to remind everybody that you're going to be receiving an email later today that's going to include a link to our archive page where we've already posted the slide presentation from today's webinar. So you can take a look at that. The email is also going to have a link to download your certificate of attendance. And then within 1 to 2 weeks, we're going to have a video recording of today's session up online on that same page. So be on the lookout for all of that. Be sure that if you're the one receiving the email, you have others with you who didn't register. Please pass that information around to them so that they can see it as well. I want to let you all know that a very brief survey is going to appear once the webinar has concluded. We'd really appreciate your feedback and your comments on today's presentation. I just want to say thank you again to both Peter Unn and Pete Lagerway for their presentations today. And I want to say thanks to all of you for attending today's PBIC webinar. And I hope you all have a great day.